The Duke of Ashcombe stood in the doorway of Larkspur Hall, with her sister's portrait tucked beneath his arm, and asked, in a voice that expected no argument, for the girl who had painted it. He did not ask for Miss Cassandra Fairweather, though it was Cassandra's likeness under his elbow, wrapped in oilcloth against the summer dust. And it was Cassandra whom the household had spent the last se'ennight dressing, coaching, and praying over. He asked for the painter. Beatrice Fairweather, 27, plain-frocked, her knuckles faintly blue with the last of a dried indigo wash she had not managed to scrub away before the carriage wheels sounded on the gravel, was standing at that moment in the still-room doorway with a rag in one hand, and she did not yet understand that the question was for her. She would remember afterward that she had thought at first he had come to complain. That was the shape her mind gave to any knock in those days, not hope, but a bill come due. Had she known what the asking would cost her, and what it would give her, she would have stepped into the hall all the same, because retreat had never once occurred to her as a strategy worth the name. Her mother's voice reached her first, high and unsteady, with the particular fright of a woman who has spent 9 years managing appearances on very little money. "Your Grace does us such honour," Mrs. Fairweather was saying. "From somewhere near the good chair no one was permitted to sit in. My daughter Cassandra will be down directly. She is only changing her. I have seen Miss Fairweather's likeness," the Duke said. "It is why I have come. I should like to see the hand that made it." There was a silence of the kind that has weight, the kind a house holds the way a chest holds breath. Beatrice set down the rag. She untied her apron with fingers that did not shake, though she noted, with the cool interest she brought to her own reactions the way she might note weather, that they might have. She walked into the hall the way she walked into every room in that house, unannounced, unadorned, expected by no one, and dismissed by most before she had finished crossing the threshold. He was larger than the doorway had led her to expect, built like a man who worked rather than merely owned, and he held her sister's portrait not as a suitor holds a treasure, but as a magistrate holds an exhibit. "I painted it," she said. "I am Beatrice." The elder sister. His eyes went over her once, without the appraisal she had braced for, and had, in her heart, already resented in advance. He was not measuring her as a bride. He was measuring her as one measures a signature. "You painted this from life, not from another likeness, not from description, from life. She sat for me 11 mornings in the orangery, Your Grace, and complained of the cold on 9 of them. A sound came from him that was almost a laugh, and was swallowed before it could become one, the way a man swallows a cough in church. Then perhaps you can tell me," he said, "why the portrait's left eye is a fraction lower than the sitter's, a fault no drawing master would permit himself, and why I have stared at it for the better part of a fortnight, and cannot make myself wish it corrected." Beatrice felt the ground of the conversation shift under her, the way it shifted whenever anyone looked closely enough at her work to see the truth in it rather than merely the flattery. "Because it is true," she said. "Your sister's eye is lower on the left. I have looked at her face longer than anyone alive save your mother, Your Grace, and I did not think a marriage ought to begin with a lie, even a kind one, even a small one drawn in paint." Mrs. Fairweather made a small strangled sound at the word marriage spoken so baldly, as though the whole delicate machinery of the visit might collapse for want of subtlety. But the Duke was still looking at Beatrice, and something in his face had gone very still. The stillness of a man taking a fact rather than a blow, and finding he did not mind it. "I do not paint lies," Beatrice added, when the silence stretched, not even kind ones, and did not know then that she had just spoken a sentence she would hear handed back to her, transformed, before the year was through. The Duke set the wrapped portrait carefully on the hall table, corner squared to the wood, and Beatrice noticed the gesture the way she noticed everything. Filed it without knowing yet that it would matter. A man who could not help but square a crooked thing even in the middle of his own unsettlement. "I am to be married by Michaelmas," he said, to the room in general, and to her in particular. Or, "My father's will hands the whole of Ashcomb's management to my cousin Pevensey for 5 years more. On the theory that a man who will not marry cannot be trusted to keep a house. I have had 11 portraits sent me this season, Mrs. Fairweather, from 11 families, and 11 letters telling me 11 versions of a lovely, biddable, accomplished girl, and I confess I had begun to think the entire county's daughters had been painted by the same flattering hand, working 11 times over." He glanced once more at the portrait on the table, at the imperfect eye that had cost Beatrice nothing to paint, and everything to leave uncorrected. "This is the first that told me the truth before I had asked for it. I find I would like to meet the person capable of that, before I decide whether I am also willing to meet the sister." Cassandra chose that moment to descend the stairs, radiant, correctly gowned, 3 minutes too late to be first, and the Duke turned to greet her with perfect and unhurried courtesy. And all the while his eyes went, every few minutes, to the doorway through which the elder sister had disappeared, as a man's eyes go to a ledger column he suspects does not sum correctly. Beatrice understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who has spent her whole life watching rooms rearrange themselves around prettier women, that she had just been asked a question no one in this house had thought to ask her in 27 years, and that she did not yet have the first idea what answering it honestly was going to cost her. He did not leave that afternoon, though every rule of courtship suggested he ought to. He took tea in the good parlour with Cassandra seated correctly at his right hand, and answered her careful questions about the London season with careful answers of his own. It was Beatrice, he found, an hour later, in the low stone room off the kitchen garden that the family still called the studio, though it had not held a commission in 3 years. She was cleaning brushes in a jar of spirit, her sleeves pushed to the elbow, and she did not startle when his shadow crossed the doorway, only asked, without turning, "Have you come to tell me my sister does not suit?" "Your Grace, or only to look at the room where the fraud was committed? Is that what you call it?" "It is what my cousin calls it, when he thinks I cannot hear him." A fraud upon a duke's good faith, dressing an ordinary girl in paint until she looks fit for a coronet. She set the brush down, bristles up, the way her father had taught her, and turned. "I painted my sister as she is. If that is fraud, Your Grace, I do not know what honesty would look like to satisfy the county." He came into the room slowly, the way a large man learns to move among small breakable things, and studied the half-finished canvases stacked against the wall. "You do this often as anyone will sit still for it, and more often when no one will. I find faces more honest than most conversation, Your Grace. A face will tell you the truth even while the mouth is lying. That is either a very useful gift," he said, "or a very dangerous one. I have found it to be both, generally on the same afternoon." A dry voice came from the doorway before he could answer that. "If Your Grace means to stand about admiring Miss Beatrice's turpentine." "I'll have someone bring a chair, for you'll be some while." Mrs. Pruitt, who had kept house at Larkspur since before Beatrice could walk, and had buried a husband, 2 sisters, and every ounce of patience for gentry nonsense in the process, folded her arms in the doorway and looked the Duke over the way she looked over a fish at market. "Begging your pardon," Your Grace, I say what wants saying in this house. Someone must, since the family is too well bred to manage it." "I had noticed a scarcity of flattery," the Duke said. "You'll notice more of its absence before you've been a week among us," Mrs. Pruitt said, and went to see about the tea, satisfied she had made her point, whatever it had been. Beatrice found herself, in the housekeeper's wake, telling him more than she had meant to, the compressed shape a story takes when it has been carried alone too long. Her father a drawing-master once, gentle and gifted and ruined at last by a partner who took the printing money and the credit, and left nothing behind but debts, and a weak heart that stopped 3 winters past. Her mother's health uncertain since, her cousin Ambrose Vell, installed as trustee of what modest estate remained. Cassandra, pretty and 8 years her junior, groomed since the cradle to be the family's one negotiable asset in the marriage market, while Beatrice herself had been quietly, gratefully permitted to become invisible, because invisibility left her hands free to paint. "You make it sound a fair trade," the Duke said. It has been, mostly, she wiped a knuckle of dried paint from beneath her thumbnail, an old unconscious habit, a woman checking her own evidence. A person who is not looked at may look at everyone else as long and as closely as she likes. I have found that a very fair trade indeed, Your Grace, until this week. And this week? This week a duke came asking for the girl who painted the portrait, instead of the girl in it, Beatrice said, and I find I no longer know what I am meant to be invisible for. He did not answer that at once, and when he did, it was not an answer at all, but a question turned sideways, the habit of a man who had spent a long time deciding things alone, and was only beginning to practice asking. "Would you paint something for me?" "Not a sitting. A copy. I will bring you a piece from my own gallery tomorrow, and you will tell me whether it is what it claims to be." "You wish to test me." "I wish," he said, "not to be lied to again by anything wearing paint," and something crossed his face too briefly for her to read it whole, though she filed the shape of it away with the rest, a wound with a story behind it, not yet offered. She did not have to wait long for the shape of that wound to acquire a name, though it was not the Duke who gave it to her. It was her cousin. Ambrose Vell arrived at Larkspur 2 mornings later exactly, as the family was sitting down to breakfast, with the Duke's continued, unexplained presence still humming through every servant's conversation, and he came in smiling the particular smile he wore when he intended to be believed. He was a handsome man, in a spare, well-tended way, the kind of handsome that ages well because it has never had to work at itself, and he greeted the Duke with a bow calibrated to the exact degree of deference a trustee owes a duke, and not 1 degree more. "Your Grace does my small family great honour," he said, "though I confess myself surprised to find you still among us." I had understood the business of the portrait settled. "The business of the portrait," the Duke said, "has become considerably more interesting than I expected." Ah, Vell's smile did not move, though something behind it recalculated. "My cousin Beatrice has always had a fanciful hand, Your Grace. Our uncle indulged her, God rest him, past what was strictly wise. I hope she has not been filling your ear with romance about her little pictures. She means no harm by it. She has simply never had enough else to occupy her." "I have found her observations extremely precise," the Duke said, mildly, which is a different quality than romance, Mr. Vell, though I understand the two are easily confused by men who have never sat for a portrait. It was said without heat, and it landed all the same, and Beatrice, watching her cousin's jaw, saw the smile hold and hold and hold, the particular discipline of a man accustomed to holding a smile through, worse than this. Later that same day, In the corridor outside the estate office, Vel found her alone with an ease that told her he had been waiting for the chance. "You will want to be careful," he said, low, pleasant, the gentlest voice in any room he occupied, "of what you say to His Grace about the running of this house. He is a great man, cousin, and great men grow bored of small domestic complaints very quickly, and when they grow bored they withdraw their interest, and when they withdraw their interest, your mother's physician's bill does not pay itself. I have made no complaints, Ambrose. See that you don't. I manage this family's accounts as your father trusted me to, and I would not like a duke's curiosity to go stirring up dust that has settled where it belongs." He straightened his cuff as he said it, a small habitual tug at the linen, and Beatrice, whose eye had been trained since girlhood to notice exactly such small unconsidered things, saw for the first time, filed it, said nothing. That the ink on the cuff was not the household's usual blue-black, but a cheaper reddish iron gall, the kind a man mixes for himself when he does not wish to send to town for more, and does not wish anyone counting how often he requires it. She said nothing of it to anyone. It was, that week, only a stain on a sleeve. The larks in the hedge along the drive were singing the way they sang every July, indifferent to duchesses and debts alike, and Beatrice went back to her studio and thought, not of her cousin's cuff, but of the strange weight of her own sister's portrait when she had lifted it from its easel to send it, heavier by some ounces than the canvas and stretcher alone accounted for, a discrepancy she had noticed and attributed, at the time, to nothing at all. The Duke's promised test arrived the following morning in the shape of a small dark canvas wrapped in green baize, and Beatrice, unwrapping it in the kitchen garden light, with him standing near enough that she could feel him not quite watching her hands, understood within 4 minutes of looking that it was a copy, competent, even fine, but a copy. "It is not what it claims to be," she said. "The signature is genuine, or a very good forgery of one, but the hand that laid the paint down is not the hand that signed it. Whoever made this loved the original enough to study it a very long while, and was either paid to deceive you or wished very much to please you. I cannot tell you which from the paint alone." "Both, as it happens," the Duke said. "It hung in my late father's gallery for 6 years before a dealer with a guilty conscience wrote to tell me otherwise. My father never knew. I have wondered since whether that ignorance was a mercy or a theft." "Perhaps both," Beatrice said, "as you say most things are," and this time the laugh he had been swallowing all week got loose before he could catch it, short and startled and entirely genuine, the sound of a man surprised into pleasure by someone who was not trying to produce it in him. Beatrice noted it the way she noted everything, a milestone, though she would not have called it that yet, only a small warm fact she meant to keep. They worked through the morning over the false canvas and 2 others he had brought for comparison, her explaining the tell of a rushed ground, a glaze laid on too soon, the particular tremor of a hand copying rather than creating, and somewhere in the unhurried back and forth of it, something between them thawed that had nothing to do with courtship and everything to do with 2 competent people recognizing competence. "You have not asked me," he said, near midday, "why a duke troubles himself over forged paintings rather than leaving the matter to dealers and lawyers. I assumed you would tell me if you wished it told. I was betrothed once before," he said, and the words came out flatter than the rest of his conversation, worn smooth by long handling, "to a woman whose family sent me a portrait very like your sister's, and a great many letters describing a fortune that existed largely on paper. I did not discover the falseness of either until a fortnight before the wedding, when her father's creditors discovered it for me, rather publicly, in a drawing-room I have not set foot in since. I have made rather a study since then of things that are not what they claim to be. It has made me poor company at parties and a difficult man to marry, my mother tells me, but I have found it keeps me safer than trust does. Safer, perhaps, Beatrice said. I wonder if it also keeps you lonelier. He did not answer that at once, and she did not press it, and there was in the not pressing a kind of intimacy neither of them named. There is a thing I have not told you, she said instead, quieter, watching a bee work the lavender along the studio wall rather than his face. About the running of this house. I am not yet able to lay it before you plainly. I ask you to believe that the withholding is not the same as the lie you fear. He studied her a long moment, and whatever calculation passed behind his eyes resolved, for now, in her favour. I have been lied to by people who told me everything at once and meant none of it, he said. I find I would rather wait for the truth from someone who tells me plainly that she is withholding it. It was, though neither of them called it so, a kind of promise, made in a garden, over paint. The blow came on a Thursday, which Beatrice would afterward think an unreasonably ordinary day for the ground to open. The Duke's solicitor, a narrow, careful man named Selwyn Barr, who had come down from town to review the marriage settlement's particulars before any formal offer could be drawn, requested, with scrupulous, apologetic correctness, a private word with his Grace. And Ambrose Vell arranged, with a solicitude that ought to have warned someone, to be present for it. Vell had produced, for the solicitor's benefit, a slim folio of old family papers, practice sheets he called them, kept for years in the estate desk, on which a girl's careful hand had copied out, again and again as a child's exercise, the signatures of her father, her uncle, and this was the part that made Barr's careful eyebrows rise, a fair, deliberate rendering of Mr. Selwyn Barr's own legal hand. A game, I am sure, your Grace, Vell had said, gently, gently, the gentlest voice in the room. Children do such things, but I confess it troubles me, given how very persuasive my cousin's hand has proven itself on canvas, that the dowry figures submitted with the marriage proposal were also, as it happens, copied out in Beatrice's writing rather than mine, at my request, my own hand being poor. I do not say she altered them. I say only that a man in your Grace's position, who has been burned once already by a family's arithmetic, might wish to satisfy himself the sums are what they claim to be. From a source other than the young woman whose gift is making paper say what it does not. It was, Beatrice understood later, a masterpiece of implication built entirely from true small facts arranged to point the wrong way, and it worked exactly as intended. The Duke found her that evening in the studio, and his face when he came through the door was not the face that had laughed over the false canvas 3 days before. It was the face of a man rebuilding a wall he had, against his better judgment, begun to take down. I am told, he said, without preamble, that the settlement figures came to me in your hand. I am told you have practised forging signatures since girlhood, including, apparently, my own solicitors. I would like you to tell me this is not true, Miss Fairweather, and I would like to believe you when you do. The formality of the name struck her like a slap. He had been calling her Beatrice for 3 days. It is true that I copied the figures, she said, keeping her voice level, though her hands, out of his sightline, had closed hard around the rag she held. My cousin's own hand shakes badly since a fever 2 winters ago, and he asked me to write fair for him, as I have done 100 times for household accounts no one thought worth forging. It is true I copied signatures as a girl. My father taught penmanship as well as paint your grace, and made a game of it with his daughters on wet afternoons, the way any drawing master might. If you are asking whether I altered a single figure in that settlement to your disadvantage or mine, the answer is no. I would ask you to believe it, but I understand that a man who has been lied to once does not extend belief cheaply, and I will not spend what dignity I have left begging for what should be given freely or not at all. That is either the truth, he said, or the most convincing performance of it I have yet been offered, and I no longer trust my own judgment of the difference. I find that unforgivable in myself, not in you, and I do not know, at present, which of us I am more angry with. He left without waiting for her answer, and Beatrice stood alone among the unfinished canvases with the particular stillness of a woman who has just watched a door close that she had not, until that moment fully understood she wanted kept open, and somewhere past the garden wall a lark went on singing into the dusk, entirely unconcerned with the ruin of the afternoon. The quarrel that followed was not loud. Nothing in that house was ever loud, which was, Beatrice sometimes thought, its own kind of dishonesty. Cassandra wept in her room and would not be comforted, certain the match and the family's last hope of solvency had died in a single afternoon. Mrs. Fairweather took to her bed with the headache that came whenever the household's fortunes turned, and Mrs. Pruitt moved through the halls with a face like a closed account book, saying little, missing nothing. It was 2 days into this silence that Ambrose Vell came to Beatrice with an offer wrapped in the softest possible cloth. He found her in the studio, as he always seemed to, and he closed the door behind him with a care that told her he did not wish to be overheard, and his voice, when he spoke, was kinder than she had heard it in years, which frightened her more than anger would have. "I can undo this," he said. "I have already told the solicitor I misspoke, that the forgery talk was an old man's foolish overcaution, that the figures are sound, and the hand that wrote them beside the point. The Duke need never think of it again. Cassandra's match can still be saved. Cousin, your mother's peace can be saved. All of it, if you will only do one small thing for me in return." "Which is?" "Sign this." He laid a paper on her worktable, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers, and she saw it was a deed of release, her small inheritance from her father's estate, made over to Vell's management absolutely, along with a quiet letter of resignation from the household. "You wish me to disappear. I wish you to be safe," he said, and had the grace, or the practised skill, to sound as though he believed it. "There are debts in this family older than you know, Beatrice. Obligations I have carried alone and quietly for years, so that your mother and sister need never feel their weight. If certain questions continue to be asked in this house, those debts will not stay buried, and it will not be I who suffers most publicly for their exposure. It will be Cassandra. It will be your mother's name. A quiet departure now costs you very little, cousin, weighed against that." She looked at the paper a long moment, and at her cousin's smooth, sorrowful, entirely composed face, and understood, with a clarity that felt like the lifting of a fog she had lived inside so long she had forgotten it was fog, exactly what he was, and exactly what he was asking her to purchase with her own erasure. "No," she said. "You mistake me for someone who values her comfort above her name, Ambrose. I do not sign papers I have not read the whole of, and I have not read the whole of this one. And I do not think you wish me to." His face did not change quite, but something behind it cooled by several degrees, the particular chill of a man recalculating a debt he had believed already collected. "You will regret this refusal. "I have regretted refusals before," Beatrice said, "and been glad of my own stubbornness within the 12-month every time. I find the pattern holds." He left the paper on the table when he went, as though leaving it might change her mind by proximity alone, and Beatrice sat a long while after he had gone with her hand flat upon it, not moved to burn it, not moved to weep, only turning over slowly the shape of what she now knew, and had, for months, been too afraid of the cost of knowing to examine straight on, that the household's accounts had been wrong for a long time, and that somewhere in the stretcher bars of a portrait she had sent away to a duke, she had hidden the one page of proof she had ever managed to lay her hands on. Later came sooner than she had planned for, and not by her own choosing. Within the week, word reached Larkspur that the Duke had withdrawn to Ashcombe Park, and instructed his solicitor to suspend all further correspondence regarding the settlement pending his own private review, a phrase so coldly correct that Mrs. Fairweather read it 3 times before she understood it meant, in effect, that her daughter's prospects now hung on the good faith of a man who had every reason to believe himself twice deceived. Beatrice was not dismissed outright. No one in that genteel house would have used so plain a word. But the deed of release reappeared on her breakfast plate one grey morning, with a note in Vell's careful hand, suggesting that a period at her aunt's house in the north might restore her spirits, and her mother, worn thin with worry and headache, did not contradict him. It would be easier for everyone, Cassandra said, miserable, not meeting her sister's eyes, if you were not here for a little while. Not because anyone blames you, only because everything is so very difficult when you are in the room, and Ambrose says. I know what Ambrose says. Beatrice packed her father's old paint box herself, refusing the maid's help, laying the brushes in by size the way he had taught her, and did not weep, because weeping had never once solved a ledger, and this, whatever else it was dressed as, was a ledger. She walked out to the studio one last time before her trunk was to be sent ahead, and found Mrs. Pruitt already there, arms folded, standing guard over nothing in particular, the way she stood guard over everything that mattered to her. You're not to go, Mrs. Pruitt said. I don't see that I've a choice left, Pruitt. There's always a choice left. It's only that the honest ones are usually the expensive ones, and folk get tired of paying. The old woman's face, weathered and blunt as a good boot, softened by 1 degree, which from her was a great deal. I've kept my tongue 7 years about a great many things in this house, because your father asked it of me on his deathbed, God keep him, and I am an old fool who keeps her promises past the point of sense. But I'll tell you this much for nothing, since you're leaving anyway. Your cousin does not sleep past 4 most mornings, and has not for 2 years, and I have seen the light under his study door burning when honest men are abed, and I have seen him carry small locked boxes out to the home wood at dawn, and come back without them. Make of that what you like, once you're safe away. She did not say more, and Beatrice did not ask more, understanding that the housekeeper had given her, in her own careful fashion, the largest gift she had to give, not proof, but direction. That night, before the carriage came, a letter arrived at Larkspur by a rider Beatrice did not recognise, addressed not to Mrs. Fairweather, but to Beatrice herself. In a hand she did know, her father's old print-seller in the county town, a Mr. Josiah Reed, writing to say that a gentleman's man had come round asking discreet questions about certain iron gall inks sold in small quantities to a Mr. Vell over a period of some years. Beatrice sat with the letter a long while in the dying studio light, and the question that kept her from sleep that night was not whether the Duke still believed her guilty, but whether whatever he and Barr had begun to uncover on their own would arrive at the truth in time to matter, or too late to save any of them from what her cousin might do once he understood the ground was shifting beneath his feet at last. The Duke, it transpired, had not spent his week of cold silence in grief but in work, which Beatrice would later think entirely in keeping with a man who mistrusted feeling and trusted ledgers. He had noticed, weeks before, and set aside as nothing, that the stretcher sat unevenly in its frame, a hair's breadth proud on one side. He had not been careless in a long time, holding a single candle at a raking angle across the canvas's back one midnight, more out of restless unhappiness than method. He saw what Beatrice herself had half forgotten she'd hidden, a thin seam along the lower stretcher bar where the canvas had been lifted and resewn, and beneath it, when he worked the tacks loose with a pocket knife and his own 2 hands, a folded half sheet of paper. Brittle with age and travel, covered in 2 different hands, her father's old ledger entries from years back, and beneath them, in Beatrice's own careful writing, a column of dates and sums that did not match the estate's official accounts, annotated in the margin with a single line. I do not yet know what to do with this, but I will not let it vanish while I decide. It was Mrs. Pruitt, in the end, who closed the last distance between discovery and action. 2 days after Beatrice's carriage had left for the North Road, the housekeeper appeared at Ashcombe Park's servants' entrance unannounced, having walked 4 miles rather than ask any of Larkspur's grooms to drive her, and demanded, with a bluntness that scandalised 2 footmen and delighted the cook, to speak with his Grace directly. I promised her father I'd say nothing, she told the Duke, planted in his study like a woman rooted there by conviction rather than invitation, but I did not promise I'd let his daughter be ruined for want of one old woman's courage, and I've decided the second promise outranks the first. You'll find, Your Grace, if you look, that Mr. Vell keeps a second set of books in the home wood, in a strong box under the old ice-house floor, and that he has been keeping them there since before the young miss ever picked up a paintbrush old enough to sign her own name to anything worth forging. The Duke did not ask how she knew, he had learned, in a week of careful looking, that the people a house overlooks are generally the ones who see it most clearly. He sent Barr that same night with 2 of his own men and a magistrate's authority borrowed on the strength of his rank, and what they found beneath the ice-house floor, by lantern light, in a plain iron box, was 6 years of Larkspur's true accounts, kept in Ambrose Vell's own unsteady, familiar hand, alongside receipts for a fashionable London physician and an apothecary specialising in diseases of the lung, made out again and again to a name Beatrice had never once heard spoken in that house. A boy, 9 years old, Vell's own son, sent away years before to a discreet school in Bath on the pretext of his health, and kept there, at ruinous and secret expense, ever since. The hairline crack Beatrice had once, and only once, glimpsed in her cousin's composure, a straightened cuff, a checked watch, a smile held 1 beat too long, had a name after all, and it was not greed alone. It was fear. Wearing greed's clothes, the way fear so often does. The Duke sat a long while that night with the boxed accounts before him, and the folded half-sheet from the portrait stretcher beside them, and understood, reading the 2 hands side by side in the candlelight, that he had very nearly let a lie he wanted to believe cost him the one honest thing that had been placed before him all season. They gathered at Larkspur 8 days later, on the pretext of finalising the marriage papers at last, and it was this eagerness, this hunger, to have the signatures dry and the danger past, that the Duke had counted on and used. The good parlour, cleared of its careful gentility, held more witnesses than it had ever held for a purely domestic occasion, Mrs. Fairweather, bewildered and frightened, Cassandra, pale and uncomprehending, Mr. Selwyn Barr, papers squared before him with lawyerly precision, Mrs. Pruitt in the doorway where she had appointed herself sentry, and Beatrice, sent for that very morning by a rider with a letter in the Duke's own hand that said only, "Come home. There is a thing that wants your voice to finish it." Vel arrived last, smiling, a folder of settlement papers under his arm, and stopped 2 steps into the room when he saw who occupied it. "This is a larger audience than a signing requires," he said lightly, and straightened his cuff. "Sit down, Ambrose," the Duke said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "There is a portrait I should like you to look at before anyone signs anything." He had it brought in himself, uncovered, and set upon an easel angled toward the window, where the grey morning light fell full across its surface, and beside it he set the half-sheet of paper drawn from its stretcher, unfolded now, and pinned flat beneath glass, so that every hand in the room could see the 2 columns of writing without touching them. Miss Fairweather's father kept an honest ledger for the estate until his death, the Duke said. His daughter kept, it seems, a private record of her own suspicions afterward, hidden inside her own work rather than spoken aloud, because she could not bear what speaking aloud would cost the mother and sister she loved. I have here a second ledger, recovered from beneath the floor of an ice-house on this property. In your hand, missed Vel, matching hers figure for figure, 6 years of sums drawn from this family's income, and diverted to the care of a boy in Bath, whose existence you have kept from every soul in this room. The colour left Vel's face by degrees, the way light leaves a room at dusk, and still he tried, because men like him always try. Fanciful accounting. My cousin has a gift for invention. Your Grace, we have established that already, read the 3rd line, the Duke said, the one dated 2 winters past, in your own hand, describing the ink you were low on, and the supplier in the county town you dared not visit too often for fear of remark. I have a letter from that supplier, Mr. Reed, confirming the purchase, the dates, and the name on the account. I have your handwriting, matched against 3 separate documents you have never denied writing. I have asked you one question, Mr. Vel, and I will ask it once more, in front of these witnesses, and I would have you consider very carefully before you answer it a second time. Whose child is in Bath, and whose money has been paying for him? The silence that followed had a different quality than any silence that room had held before, the particular airless quiet of a man watching the last plausible lie dissolve in his hands. Vel's mouth opened, closed, and what came out at last was not the smooth denial the room had braced for, but something smaller, rawer, unrehearsed. "Mine," he said. "He is mine. His mother died bringing him, and I would not let him die too. For want of physicians we could not honour. I meant to repay it. Every shilling. I have meant to repay it every day for 6 years." His hand, for the first time in Beatrice's memory, was not steady enough to straighten his own cuff. I did not think a dead man's daughters would miss what they had never learned to count. "They missed it," Beatrice said, quiet, from where she stood near the window. Every winter their mother's medicine went short, and every season Cassandra's gowns were let down instead of replaced. And I do not say that to shame you, Ambrose. I say it because you asked me once to sign away my name to protect a family from a debt you had already spent, and I would like you to understand, before this room decides what becomes of you, that the family you claim to have protected paid for your son's life without ever being told they were paying. Vel did not answer that. He sat down, unbidden, in the chair nearest him, an old man's collapse in a young man's body, and put his face briefly in his hands, and no one in the room moved to comfort him, and no one moved to strike him either. It was the Duke, in the end, who spoke into the wreckage with the particular gentleness of a man who has decided mercy is a stronger sentence than punishment. "I will not have you prosecuted," he said. "Not for Miss Fairweather's sake, though she has more cause than any of us to want it, and not entirely for yours, though I find I cannot hate a man for loving his son too much, even when I despise how he chose to pay for it. I will not have it, because a trial makes orphans and widows of the innocent along with the guilty. And your son in Bath has done nothing but be born to a frightened man. You will resign the trusteeship this hour, in Mr. Barr's presence. You will make over what remains recoverable to Mrs. Fairweather's management, with Barr overseeing the accounts until such time as trust can be rebuilt or need no longer be tested. You will take your son, and what small living I am, prepared to settle on you privately, out of my own purse and not this family's, and you will remove yourselves to a distance where neither your face nor your debts will trouble this house again. That is not kindness to you, Mr. Vel. It is protection of everyone your kindness never quite managed to protect, and I would ask you to be grateful for the distinction, because you have earned a harder sentence than the one I am giving you." Vel looked up once, at Beatrice, and something passed over his ruined face that was almost, at the very last, an apology, though he did not have the words left to make it one, and Mrs. Pruitt, watching from the doorway, blew her nose with tremendous ceremony, and declared to no one in particular that the room had gotten dusty, which fooled no one and comforted everyone, and outside the window, indifferent to all of it, a lark went on singing in the hedge, as it had every summer of Beatrice Fairweather's life. It was 3 weeks later, in the same kitchen garden studio, where he had first asked her to look at a false canvas and tell him the truth, that the Duke came to find her again, alone this time, without solicitors or witnesses or the weight of any deadline pressing behind him. "I did not come to offer for your sister," he said, without preamble, because he had never learnt the trick of easing into a thing he had already decided. "I did not come, either to offer for you because it would settle a scandal, or repair a fortune, or satisfy a dead man's will. I have had a great many people explain to me, this last month, all the sensible reasons a duke and a portrait painter might suit. I find I do not care for any of those reasons, and I would not have you accept me for any of them either." Beatrice set down her brush, carefully, bristles up, and turned to face him fully for what felt like the first time since the hall, the portrait, the very first asking. "Then what reason is left, your Grace?" "I did not ask for the sister," he said. "I asked for the painter. I find I am still asking. I would like to marry you, Beatrice, because you are the only person who has told me the truth before I had the courage to ask for it, and because I have watched you refuse an easy lie at cost to yourself more than once now, and because your first eye is a fraction lower than the second, and I no longer wish it corrected, in the painting, or in you. Marry me because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take." Beatrice looked at him a long moment, and felt the whole of the last 2 months settle in her chest like a ledger finely balanced, debts and gifts both accounted for, and neither erasing the other. "I do not paint lies," she said, softly, and watched the words land on him the way she had said them to him first, weeks ago, in this same room, over this same worklight. Not even kind ones. "I will not marry you for a kind reason either, your Grace. I will marry you because I have looked at your face longer than I have looked at any face outside my own family, and I find it is the one I would like to keep looking at, for no better reason than that it is true. The wedding, when it came, in the last gold week of September, with the equinox still owed its storm, and the larks gone quiet for the season, was small by the standards of dukedoms, and enormous by the standards of Larkspur Hall. Mrs. Pruitt wept without shame through the whole of it, and claimed after that it was only the dust of the church, though the church had been swept twice that morning on her own orders. Cassandra, whose own prospects had seemed so entirely bound up in her sister's ruin that spring, found herself courted that autumn by the Duke's cousin Pevensey, who had come to Larkspur meaning to contest a will, and had stayed, somewhat to his own surprise, to fall in love with the second fair-weather daughter's easy laugh, and who proved, once the inheritance question no longer stood between them, a decent and steady man rather than the rival his early letters had suggested. Mrs. Fairweather's headaches eased along with her accounts, both restored to health under Barr's careful, honest oversight. Ambrose Vell was heard of only once more, in a brief letter the following spring, thanking the Duke, stiffly and without excuse for himself, for a physician's recommendation that had done his son considerable good. The letter was answered, and the correspondence, by unspoken agreement, ended there, mercy given its proper distance. Beatrice's father's name, forgotten by the county for 3 years, found its way back into conversation the following year, when the Duke of Ashcombe quietly commissioned and hung, in his own gallery beside the false canvas kept now as a lesson rather than a shame, a portrait signed for the first time in the artist's own full name, Beatrice Fairweather, it read, small and certain in the corner, and beneath it, framed separately, the folded half-sheet that had once hidden inside a stretcher bar, kept now not as evidence, but as a relic of the year truth, had cost her everything, and then given it all back. Almost a year to the day after a duke had first stood in a doorway asking for the girl who painted a portrait, Beatrice stood in that same doorway herself, mistress of Larkspur's summers and Ashcombe's winters both, watching a carriage come up the drive through the same July heat, larks singing in the same hedge, and she did not need to ask who it was, because she had been the one, this time, who had written asking him to come home. He came through the door with paint on his own cuff, an amateur's clumsy attempt at her craft that he had taken up that spring and refused, with great stubbornness and greater bad temper, to abandon despite no discernible talent for it, and he did not ask for the girl who had painted anything. He only crossed the hall, unhurried, sure of his welcome now in a way he had not been sure of anything the year before, and said her name the way a man says the one word he has never once tired of saying. And Beatrice thought, watching him come, that she had spent 27 years believing herself made for invisibility, and had learned instead, in the space of a single portrait and one impossible summer, that she had only ever been made for this, to be looked at, finally, by someone who saw the truth and did not ask her to paint over it. If this story warmed you, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who kept the truth safe inside their own work, until someone finally thought to ask them for it, then stay a while longer by the fire before you go. There's a chair kept here for you, a candle lit, a kettle always just this side of singing. Tell me, if you would, in the comments below, was it the hall, the stretcher bar, or the studio doorway that stayed with you longest, the moment you first knew the girl who painted the portrait was the one worth coming back for? Stay close to the hearth and keep your place among us by subscribing. There is always room for one more listener here. And wherever you are tonight, be gentle with the ones who paint you truer than you paint yourselves. and sleep well, knowing the truth, however long delayed, is nearly always worth the waiting.